everyone, and welcome to the Burgess podcast, the show where we are opening up conversations about life at sea, discussing hot topics within the industry, as well as offering mental health support and promoting well-being for crew. We also have our very own in-house recruitment team, so if you or anyone you know is currently looking for a new position, please send your updated CV to recruitment@burgessyachts.com or check out our recruitment posts on Instagram @Burgess Yacht Crew. As regular listeners will know, on this podcast we do our best to keep conversations about diversity and equality at the forefront, which is why we are so pleased to welcome our guest today, who in our opinion has been a real trailblazer in this area. We are of course talking about the one and only Rhea Rouw, founder of Yachting International Radio. Rhea has fearlessly tackled tough conversations and been a champion for change throughout her career. Her genuine passion for fostering diversity and inclusion within yachting is truly admirable. So join us as we delve into Rhea's background, what led her into the yachting industry, and what drives her relentless pursuit for change. Hi Rhea, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I am great. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate the time.
So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in yachting, and what led you to start Yachting International Radio?
Well, I'm originally from Canada. I grew up in a very, very small town in a logging yard. Spent a lot of time in logging camps around the very northern part of British Columbia, mile zero on the highway to Alaska. My father owned a fishing chartering company as well as a logging company. So I spent a lot of time around boats. My dad eventually bought a 32-foot bayliner. So, we were sort of in that, as a small town can be, into the boating and maritime industry. And my father also was from Newfoundland. My mother was from Victoria Island. So the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean were big factors in my growing up. As I got older, I got into media for the simple fact that I grew up in a household that women didn't have a voice. We were to be barefoot, pregnant, silent, cooking, cleaning, not to date myself, but when I was born, my mother wasn't even allowed to have a credit card in her own name. So she had to have her husband's signature to get a credit card, even a driver's license at that time. So I always saw this disparity between men and women. And I'm a feisty redhead, and it really bothered me. And I wanted to change that. So as I got older, I ended up getting into newspaper. Then I went into television, radio. So I've been magazine advertising. I've been through all forms of media. And then I moved to Mallorca. And if you're English speaking in Mallorca, you know everything about yachting, because that's the people that you associate with is the yachting industry. So I wanted to create something that I could earn a living at while still doing what it was that I felt my mission was, and something that I love to do. And so I started up Yachting International Radio.
What was the original idea for the station? Was it to talk diversity?
It wasn't, actually. Well, it was about diversity, yes. I started Yachting International Radio and I built it on 4 pillars because we all know that you need 4 corners in order to make something sturdy. It was mental health, sustainability, diversity, and equality. That was sort of what I built Yachting International Radio on. But initially it was for the yachting industry as a whole, for business, for everything. But about 6 months in to Yachting International Radio, I realized that I needed to address crew issues because nobody was listening. Nobody was listening. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that crew are coming in at 18 years old. It is their first job out of the house. It is their first time leaving the home, and they're being dismissed. Their needs, their desires, their wants, everything a kid experiences when leaving home for the first time was completely ignored and dismissed. There were issues, serious issues happening on board when it came to the equality, when it came to mental health, when it came to bullying, harassment, sexual harassment. None of these things were being discussed. And it was happening far too often. And it almost seemed like we were back in the days of Pirates of the Caribbean. There was no law. It was an absolute lawless thing. And I thought, you know what, this is wrong. Someone has to address this, but everyone's afraid to. So being the ballsy redhead that I am, I thought, all right, well, that's the direction that I'm going to go because I have 3 kids and I now have a grandchild. And if we're going to make change, someone has to have the balls to stand up and make that change and say what everybody else is afraid to say, because unless it's spoken about, no change is going to be made.
And how was it received when you first started those conversations? Because I mean, is it fair to say you were one of the first people to start talking diversity and equality and in the industry specifically?
I think that I was probably the first person ever in the industry to talk about issues that I talk about as frankly as I do. A lot of people have danced around the issues, they've approached the issues, they've gently spoken about the issues, but all with that gloss and shine that comes with yachting. And you're never going to see an impact when it's delivered with a bit of a buff. If you're going to make an impact, it's got to be real and it's got to be honest and it's got to hurt. Because if it doesn't hurt, you're not going to make that change. And so, yes, I guess I was the first to talk frankly about these issues, not to take anything away from many that came before me, because there's always people that have come before any of us that try to make change. They were there, but they were careful. And I wasn't careful.
And people are afraid of that, aren't they?
They're very afraid because yachting is almost like a bit of a mafia. It's either you fit in or you don't. And in my entire lifetime, I've never had any desire to fit in, because I don't think you can change the world. I don't think you can create. I don't think you can grow. I don't think you can flourish if you're satisfied with just simply fitting in.
Absolutely. And, you know, if we're all honest, how many of us actually do fit in? And how many of us are just trying to fit the mold just to get through the day, just to get those jobs, just to earn that salary?
I think yachting is an Instagram feed, really.
Yeah.
You know, everybody that you see is all putting on a show, putting on an act to be what they think everybody else wants to see. And I think that's such a shame, because what makes this world such a beautiful and colorful place is the individuality of every person that's ever existed. We don't have the things that we have today. We don't have yachts. We don't have motors. We don't have electricity. We don't have, I mean, literally anything that you utilize in your day-to-day life was created and invented by somebody who was thinking outside the box.
And we need more of that kind of thinking.
Well, if you take a look at the world that we see today, yes, you're right. We need more of that kind of thinking, because we have literally dug the biggest hole on the face of the planet for ourselves, and we're throwing each other in as fast as we possibly can so that we come out on top. And that's the shame of it, is that if we're going to make a change, we can't be digging that hole and throwing other people in. We got to be working together. We got to come together, and we've got to say, you know what, there needs to be a change. It needs to be now. It needs to happen. And we need to help those people that are taking that stand to take that stand even further, because that's the group I want to be part of. I want to be the one that makes the change. I want to be the one that leaves a legacy that is better than what we see today, because what we see today is not the way anybody should be living, period. There is too much hate. There is too much judgment. There is a mental health crisis. There is an equality issue. There is racism is growing at a more rapid rate than before the pandemic. The world needs to change, and it needs to change now.
I mean, that's the ultimate message here, isn't it? And with Yachting International Radio, we talked earlier about how inspiring that show is, certainly for us, and how brave you are with some of the conversations that you have. Do you find it difficult to find guests, to find hosts, to find people to, because we want to talk diversity, but it's actually quite hard, because we're asking people to raise their heads above the parapets and you know, to make themselves known. Do you find it difficult to find those people to talk, or are people now coming to you wanting to share their stories?
It still is very difficult, because when you speak out of turn, still today in this industry, you are smacked down. It took me over a year. I have a show called Uncensored, and it talks about all the topics that, you know, we talk about rape on board. We talk about, some of the most dire topics that you ever want to talk about. Uncensored. It took me a year and a half to find the right host for that. And we don't get a lot of new shows lately because people are afraid to come on. And some of those shows that we did do, we couldn't actually show the person because they didn't want to be seen on camera for fear of future repercussions within the industry and getting word. I had a diversity show. I ended up cycling through 5 different hosts because each one of them had the same issue, and 2 of them I lost to below deck. And more than likely for the simple fact that, they have to have their correct ratio of diverse people, right? They've gone on to have great careers and they were wonderful. I wish them all the best. They're absolutely amazing. And I'm so proud of them for going where they went and doing what they've done. That being said, it was difficult for them to get guests because nobody wanted to stand up and say, yes, I am Asian. And it's been difficult because they knew that not only did they have that working against them, but if they raised their voices to express their concerns, that'd be a double whammy, right? Mm. So I have now started a new diversity podcast hosted by a doctor out of the US, originally from Nigeria. And we are doing a different podcast based on diversity, but not necessarily to do with the yachting industry, because you can't get people to talk about it. They're still afraid.
Yeah. And also, we're still at the stage where there isn't much diversity in yachting.
No.
What keeps you motivated? Because being that big voice on a topic that frightens a lot of people for whatever reason, you do get slammed for it. Not you personally, but any person who speaks out on any topic that goes against the status quo does get slammed for it. So what keeps you so motivated to keep going with that conversation?
All you have to do is look at the state of the world right now. We're going to hell in a handbasket because attitudes are the way they are straight across the board. And it's not just in yachting. It is the world, the face of the world. And we are leading ourselves down a path that it doesn't look like there's any return unless we change our attitudes and change our thought processes and become less of a me society and more of an us society.
So in yachting specifically, do you see that in yachting as well?
Yes. I mean, we've seen that. We've seen it sort of in the greater spectrum of social media. Everyone wants to be a star. Everyone wants to be insta famous. They want to be this individual that is known for being all knowing, all seeing, all great. And in yachting, it's almost as if little tiny groups of people come together and sort of support one another to the detriment of everyone else, without realizing that if you come together as a whole and you work together as a whole, there is a possibility to grow beyond your greatest imagination. Because the more minds working in the same and the right direction, the more possibilities that we can find.
And on a yacht where you're in such a confined space, that's probably never been more important, because together as a team, you can achieve amazing things on an individual basis and as a team. But if you are not inclusive, if you are discriminating against each other, fighting each other, on an individual level, the impact on your mental health is awful. And as a team, it's just very detrimental, isn't it? So it's having the opposite effect of what you're there to achieve.
Well, I think that's one of the many things that make the yachting industry very, very hypocritical. We have, sort of the shore-based businesses, yacht management, we've got crew recruitment. Everyone's talking about, let's create the perfect team on board. But they're not emulating that. And when we talk about leadership is being in a position of power or in a position to teach those that come after. So if you are conducting yourself, your business and everything that you do in a certain way, but yet you're asking those that come along behind you to do it differently, it's never going to change. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the industry right now. We're asking these young crew to behave and to act and to do in a certain way. But we're not willing to do that ourselves. And then we start seeing, we've got, a massive crew shortage. We don't know what we're going to do. There's no crew retention. Well, that's because they're acting exactly as they're taught how to act by the powers that be within the industry.
So what changes would you like to see? What changes do you think? Bearing in mind, obviously, the goal is massive and it's not going to happen overnight, let's face it. What steps should we be taking?
That's a difficult question, because really it's just having an open mind. We see an industry that has literally priced the ability to become crew out of the realm of those that are willing to do the jobs that crew need to do. You take a look at places like India, the Philippines, throughout Asia, their income doesn't equal that kind of outlay to begin with. And then once they do those courses, they're not guaranteed a job because we've got an industry that is discriminatory. So that whole concept has to change. At one stage, and you see it on land, there is apprenticeships, for example, or a company is willing to hire someone on because of their value structure, because of their work ethic, and train them as they go. Now, that is probably the best way to go forward and to create that longevity, because you hire someone based on who they are as a person, train them in the skills that they need in order to do the job that you are looking for, and train them the way that you want them, and they will stick with you forever. They will be loyal.
We spoke recently with the UKSA, and they've started this charity where they're trying to encourage and sponsor children from more deprived areas to get into the maritime industry as a whole, and opening up that door to them that, like you said, ordinarily would just be closed. But it's such a small, it's Isle of Wight, it's such a small pocket, isn't it? But it just needs that kind of mentality, needs to be on a more global scale to reach more people. But it's positive to think that is being talked about, that is recognised now and being talked about.
Well, I mean, we have an industry. Now, for example, 20 years ago, you could walk into your local bar, grab the passed out drunk off the local bar, haul him out, stick him on your yacht, and he'd wake up somewhere in the middle of an Atlantic crossing, and he would be told that he's the chief mate, and he'd say, okay, and off he went. And at that stage, they were making more money than their parents did probably in a year in their month. Now, what has happened with this industry as I've watched it over the past 20 years is that we have had so much of that middle fluff. We've got the crew agents, we've got the yacht managers, and I'm not saying that none of these people are needed, but it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and more of a moneymaker. So there seems to be this gap, this almost canyon between those people that really matter and really make this an industry, which is crew and owners. The crew are suffering, and as a result of the crew suffering, the owners are suffering. And you can have as many forums as you want on crew retention and attracting new crew. It isn't going to do any difference whatsoever because you're inviting the same people to say the same things time and time again. You're not saying let's increase the salaries. We're not saying let's decrease the amount of money that has to be paid to get into the industry. We're not talking about apprenticeships. I mean, the issue is that it's more advantageous for a crew agent to fire a crew member and hire on a new crew member, because every time they hire a new crew member, they get their commission. So for them, that's more advantageous than actually saying, we've hired this person, let's give them training, let's give them more training, let's continue that career path on a long-term basis. That isn't happening because it's not financially advantageous for crew management companies. And until that issue gets sorted, it's still going to stay exactly the way it is today and get worse over the years. We're already seeing a shortage, and it's not just the yachting industry, it is the maritime industry as a whole.
Well, Rhea, thank you so much for this conversation. There is a lot of food for thought there. I think, we've mentioned it's an industry which is slow in moving forward. I personally, I applaud your work. I applaud your bravery and, raising your head above the parapet and having these conversations that do incite a bit of fear. It's like you said, they're conversations that need to be had in order to move forward. But there's a lot of food for thought there. There's a lot, I think we can all be better. And hopefully these conversations will inspire some thought somewhere.
Well, on my end, rather than having it all negative, I've got to say, there are absolutely some stellar people within the industry that really want to see change being made. And I applaud every single one of them. It's not easy to have a moral ground that you want to stand upon. It is difficult. And so anybody that does do that, I applaud. And the more you lift up others, I think karma comes around at some stage or another. And you will find yourself elevated and lifted as a result of you doing everything you can for somebody else. And so I applaud you guys as well, Burgess, for having this conversation and putting that conversation out there and engaging many people across the industry in creating change and literally creating not only a better yachting industry, but a better world.
Thank you, Rhea. That's, beautiful closing statement. And food for thought for everyone. And let's work together on this. Thank you, Rhea.